Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, a troubling bit of information has come up with the Michael Aquino case, which I'm trying to step away from here as best as I can, but a very interesting thing has come up which I ran into. I mean, there's so much to investigate and look into, and that is the person called Paul Bonacci. Now, he was connected to the Noreen Gosh case. Johnny Gosh, who was grabbed off the street as a paper boy. It's now been almost 35 years with many witnesses and the mishmash of confusion and problem and a lack of interest. I mean, a boy disappears, then other boys disappear, and there's no serious investigation. It's pretty shocking. And you can look up that stuff, Noreen Gosh and Paul Bonacci. Now, what's interesting is Paul Bonacci is a person who claims to have detailed information, was one of these slaves, worked for, doing many criminal acts, and including assaulting and raping a lot of these kidnapped boys. It's a very interesting case with him. And he gives a lot of information that is fairly credible, and this is what makes everything a little weird. Now, the point is that he's been identified and get information and located even places where people were taken to that is kind of irrefutable. Now, one of the problems with Bonacci is that he's a schizophrenic, and you have to talk to his personalities to get information from him. So he's got at least 7 personalities. So all of a sudden we have big problems there. Now, he claims this is part of MKUltra in terms of what was done to them, that they actually fracture your personality. So if you're ever captured, you go into a personality that doesn't know anything and they can't extract any information from you. And that this is a process they condition certain people with, including him. Now, you know, this makes 100% sense. And we have to look at it in that particular fashion. It also makes somebody very uncredible. And this is the problem with Kathy O'Brien and so many other people that have come out and stated things about who their torturers are, who's happening to them. And of course, this tracks us back to the ultimate Michael Aquino again. And what is it? So there's always up and down with him, left and right. It's always hard to figure out what's exactly the truth here is. He's a very strange person who wants to come off as a Boy Scout. And a lot of the stuff just doesn't add up. I mean, come on, nobody's like that. This guy is a military officer, been involved in strange situations, involved in all sorts of things. And what is this psyops that he's involved with? You know, is that really intelligence? Is he a frontline warrior person, which I would think not. PsyOps, you know, dropping booklets, doing other things. It's a semi-intelligence area, but it's not really CIA-based. Yet he says he had all these contacts, and there may be a great amount of incestuous contact between intelligence agencies. I would think there would be, but there's also, they don't like each other. They're rivals. Now, Paul Bonacci claimed to have been involved with certain people, including in the Larry Lawrence King, which we had this big Franklin savings cover-up. So he was involved with that. He gives lots of information about these people that kidnap teenagers and everything. There's quite a bit of this going on, particularly in this one area where Johnny Gosh was taken from, and his mother has been investigating for over 30 years now. And it's got very little help from anybody. They're treating this like some sort of, don't bother me, it's a runaway, this isn't serious. And they're not really tracking him down very well. And there's others that have disappeared. There's even 2 girls in that same kind of neighborhood area that have disappeared. A couple of boys, 2 sisters, which have never been heard from again. Well, this is pretty frightening stuff, people. This is very frightening. You know, things, we need to know what's going on here. I mean, this is quite frightening. And to think that paper boys are being grabbed at a horrible time of day, that 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning when nobody's around, and then nobody cares. I mean, I don't understand why they're even continuing to deliver papers that way. This is too dangerous, and why would you possibly have it? There was another boy that apparently was found dead. There's a bunch of interesting things that happened in that investigation, the Johnny Gosch thing. So basically, he was a paper boy. He was grabbed at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. People witnessed him being dragged into a car. There's been talk that he was tasered, that there was 2 people there. Paul Bonacci claims that he was one of the people that grabbed him. And this is this whole pedophile that goes on, and all the other criminal activities that go on there. And there's a lot of people that are grabbed, used, conditioned, tortured, etc. Now, in the bigger picture, I'm a full believer that this is going on. I've seen so much weird stuff going on personally that I'm not surprised this would happen at all. Now, you may think this is outrageous, but I've seen it personally. How doctors give drugs to organized street gangs, giving them boxes of drugs. I've seen them take over entire stores and parking lots. Walmart was one of them. Costco's another. Trader Joe's is another, where they actually took over the entire store. And this happens all the time. So the kind of complicity by hundreds of people is frightening. The street gangs do all this work while the cops support them. And if there is security, like there was in Walmart, well, that guy just drove to the side of the parking lot away from everything. But think of the corruption there. So I've seen it personally. I know it happens. Now, if they're going to this extent to harass a nobody, what about people that want lots of money and want to kidnap children and use them sexually, which is big money and part of this sick, evil fetish that seems to be permeating the entire world? Well, I believe it's happening. I believe this is going on, and why is there no interest in that? Why is there no people investigating? Why does the FBI look at this stuff as a joke and not interested? Another runaway. Well, I don't care if they're runaways or not. They're underage, and they should be hunted down as runaways. I don't even know what that means. So people are disappearing, and they need to be found, and it's as simple as that. The circumstances of that are highly questionable, considering we have all these other things, and so many weird things happen, so much corruption goes on. So Paul Bonacci apparently sued this guy Lawrence King with the Franklin situation and went to court with it. And of course, Lawrence King didn't show up. So it was an uncontested trial, and the judge ruled in Paul Bonacci's favor, which is probably standard. So the guy didn't show up. I believe what you're saying. I give you an award, which was $1 million, and it was never paid. I don't know who was supposed to pay that $1 million, but he ruled in Paul Bonacci's favor. But, that's pretty typical. People are saying that the judge believed this guy's story, so they gave the money to him. Well, in the bigger picture it is, but, the bottom line is it was his story and his story only, and the judge found it credible enough, or was honest enough to say, hey, look, a lot of weird stuff is going on. I'm going to find in your favor. Obviously, this person didn't even bother to come to court, so we're going to rule in your favor. But it was kind of a worthless ruling because there's no way to collect that money, apparently. So the fact of what Paul Bonacci stated wasn't there was no contention against it, so there's no way to prove whether it was right or wrong. It's just the fact, well, since nobody else is here, you win. Now, the problem is Paul Bonacci is this is the problem. These cases are so difficult. He has several personalities. And as I just mentioned, this is what they force you into in the spy business, so you don't give out information. So you talk to a personality that he has, and there's 5 or 7, and then it gives you certain information. So he talked about this Johnny Gosch kidnapping, and he had physical contact with with Johnny, and the fact of even having sex with him and being put on tape. This is part of what they do. So the whole idea is that he was able to identify the different injuries that Johnny Gosch had. Tattoos, marks on the legs, etc. Now, I don't know where we'd get this information from. It's possible that some of this was recorded in the media. A lot was talked about. So did he get it from there? This is pretty intimate information. He also discussed that he said that Johnny told him that his mother was into meditation or yoga, and she's a yoga instructor. And she claims that she never released this information at this time. Now, she is talked about yoga and other things. So I don't, again, here's the timeline. Is any of this correct? But this was before she released that information. Well, how would he know that? This is a guy who's in federal prison for several different crimes. He's a schizophrenic. He's serving his prison sentence. Did he get this information that she was into yoga? How did that come up? I mean, that's pretty personal stuff. So he's come up with many different personal things, and he has been able to verify not only to Johnny Gosch's mother, but to a private investigator that she hired, that confirmed that he has given him information that he can verify. Now, there's a few problems because they were on this talk show that must date 15, 20 years ago, and they talked about why wasn't Paul Bonacci being credited here. And they're saying, well, that's because he's in prison and he's a criminal. And so people don't want to take anything he says correctly. But, you know, jailhouse confessions or information is taken all the time. This is a way that people get information on others, and you give information on somebody and you get out on parole earlier. Also, his coming out with this information didn't help him in prison to get out. It actually delayed him getting out, and he served more time than anybody else in that state for that crime since. So here we go again, very complicated. Now, the problem is when somebody's schizophrenic and has been programmed, well, what do we know? What we can't believe them all that much until we can get verification. But apparently, there's a whole bunch of physical verifications. Now, did he carefully watch this case and accumulate all these little details? Well, you know, that's what makes you a credible source when you do stuff like that. But we don't really know. It doesn't appear to be. So this is pretty shocking stuff because we have several people, and as you said, you know, people like Cathy O'Brien, as much as I sympathize with her, a lot of things don't make sense with it. You can't be horribly beaten and still perform as a prostitute, and you'd be horribly scarred and wouldn't be able to function for weeks or months, most likely months. I mean, you don't heal from stuff like this instantly and then all become the sex pot again. You don't have your jaw knocked out of alignment and then get back into the swing of things. This doesn't make sense. And a lot of the people she claimed to have sex with were people that are too old to function properly. And this is even pre-Viagra. But Viagra doesn't work if you're impotent anyway. It tends to help you. It's a strange medication, anybody who's taken it. It doesn't just give you an erection. You have to be basically aroused, and then it adds more blood. So this was pre-Viagra, and all the things talked about are pretty outrageous with a bunch of old men that I don't think sexually could function. Yet she claims she was raped by them and had all these sexual encounters. So it's very sketchy there. Now, were other things going on? Was she programmed to think that happened? Well, I tend to believe that more, because she's been conditioned with everything. So the people she saw, the events she had, well, it seems to me a lot of this she was programmed to do. So you're going to remember this, you're going to remember that, and we're going to make sure they're big-time celebrities and everything else, because this is going to make a big impression on you. Bob Hope, Chris Christopherson, who else is there? She names almost everybody. I think Frank Sinatra. Everybody was abusing her because she was the woman they gave to everybody as a present or whatever. So it's very hard to buy that. And there's a few other, I think there's another woman, and there's some other people, and there's another guy who said he was, Michael Aquino programmed him as a child until the age of 10. So he remembers what happened to him before that, and of course he was being programmed to be the Antichrist. And this was done by Michael Aquino, of course. So, well, what validities does that have? And unfortunately, that person is another bizarre person who went through horrible drug problems, was a homosexual prostitute, was going through so many things, and has claimed that his entire family was abusing him horribly, killing people. He helped kill somebody, drinking blood, eating flesh. All these things is really over the top. That's a David Scherter, but you know, I'm sure there's probably something happened there, but the details, how correct are those? And again, we have problems going back to anybody but Aquino, which makes things very difficult. Now, it does trace back to the OT base in, was it Omaha? There's a military base there, but the military base is everywhere. Are we to think that? And of course, when you start looking at these timelines, things get very confusing, and do we know or not? Now, we've already established that the Presidio molestations had nothing to do with him. He was in Washington, D.C. while these were going on, and all the accusations against him really held no water. The problem was he was pointed out by a particular supposedly child. They identified his house and everything else. And it's even been some talk that, they drove around the neighborhood, and then when they came by a certain place, and did they stop and say, does this look familiar? Probably. But they went to other places and do the same thing. They're insinuating that this was relatively random, but these are, very young children. And they pointed out the apartment, etc., and they identified so many things there, which is basically not true. And from what I understand, Michael Aquino's apartment was filmed before this by a news media, and that black living room was not correct. It was a black bedroom, and we don't know if it was soundproofed or not. There's just a lot of ifs, ands, and buttocks here. So it's difficult to tell. There doesn't seem to be a link of anything. Now, they didn't find anything in Aquino's house of value. They're insinuating again that the fact that they found pictures and videotapes, that these were of a sexual nature. Nothing was found sexual at his house. And apparently the investigators went out to different areas to check on him with prostitutes, and prostitutes claim that he went there and had bisexual sex and was involved in S&M, which of course the Temple of Set has written a whole book on. The fact that he may have went somewhere to have these kind of things in San Francisco, but I don't know if anybody testified to that. That's what was told to this investigator that was written down. Again, we can't prove it. They're not even saying they got it from prostitutes. I don't know where they'd get that information from. We just don't know. But we certainly know that the Temple of Set, the trapezoid division, there's an entire book written on sadomasochistic magic by Edred Thorson, who is a practitioner of it and part of that Nazi-type stuff that Aquino is so into. And to think that Aquino is just, cookies and pie in his belief systems and sexuality just really can't be the case. These are people that are Satanists. You think they'd be on the kinky side, and you would think that sadomasochism, S&M, bondage, etc., which is pretty popular with everybody. I mean, Donna did an entire tour with that to kind of shock people. I don't know if anybody was. We have the 50 Shades of Grey now, so this entire bondage and whipping and other things certainly has been around a long time, and is certainly not something unique or unusual, and probably a lot of very common people practice this. Not to the point of hurting anybody. The whole idea, it's a stimulant, not necessarily a hurt, and you got to know how to do this. But if you abuse someone, even willingly, by whipping them, and they get horribly red and inflamed, well, that's not going away for months. And this is what, of course, Kathy O'Brien talked about. So, I have to see, you got to look at the facts. People want to talk about this and this happened to you, but what does that really mean? What happens when your jaw is dislocated and you're whipped and bleeding, laying on a bathroom floor? And then she states a few hours later, she was at a meeting where she was sitting there in a cocktail dress. Well, that isn't going to cut. If you're bleeding and everything else, this is a serious thing. It's going to take a long time. You're going to have bandages. You're going to have to do this. If your jaw's been knocked out, you're not going to be able to do much of anything, and you're going to be in horrible screaming pain. So this is where I have a problem. If you're going to be having sex with a bunch of old celebrities, old men, Alzheimer-ridden Reagan, well, I frankly doubt that he was able to perform sexually at all. I don't buy that for a minute. But we have to look at the timelines. And who is this? And, of course, she also claims that, of course, Michael Aquino was there doing things. Well, we have to trace the timelines. So I believe some of this happened in Washington, D.C., and she knows the particular years and time. Well, if we had a real cooperative military, we'd know where pretty much exactly, or have a good idea where he was. Now, at that particular time, I think he was in Washington, D.C., teaching or being a student at a particular college there. Now, Paul Paul Bonacci here came out, and of course, it's the same old story. It's leading back to Aquino, and he claims, now he couldn't give names of very many people because they all covered it up. He claims he was able to name Aquino because he was in the Temple of Set. Well, that changes things a little bit as well. You were in the Temple of Set, and now you're also affected with this, and they're doing these kind of brainwashing things on you, etc. Well, I guess that's possible to a degree, but we have to be careful here. But he is giving very detailed information on other things. Does that mean this has credibility? Well, we have to be careful because of the fact that information in one area may be very correct and not in another. He may be brainwashed, and maybe a lot of these people were brainwashed that Michael Aquino as the dump man. Let's go to him. Nobody likes him. He's this rotten Satanist, so he's going to be the scapegoat. Now, I don't know. We have to look at that. Now, one of the interesting things that happened is that he claimed to have been taken with Johnny to a house in Colorado, near Colorado Springs. And this was in 1986. Now, this is 4 years before he was released from the military. This particular time, I believe he was in Washington, D.C., but he was still stationed out of the Presidio. Now, he wasn't dropped from his military contract until 1990, a contract he claimed was his long-term contract, meaning that I don't think there was an expiration date on that. He had a long-term. I'm still trying to figure all that out. While that contract was closed, and all military officers apparently have contracts, or even in the military in general, so that long-term contract, which I'm assuming went on indefinitely, was canceled by the military, which apparently was because of political pressure from Jesse Helms, a Southern right-wing Christian going after the demoned Michael Aquino. So the whole idea is that is the reason why it is claimed that he was persecuted, because they can't link him to anything. So, because of the fact that he wasn't even there during this. So it was all about this Hambright guy who is apparently a weirdo himself, an ex-minister, who apparently was charged with... So Hambright was charged with most everything. Over 60 charges, and all of these charges were dropped. They kept dropping them and dropping them. They had him down to one charge, and then it was dropped. And the same thing happened with Aquino, who's accused with this one child only. But the bottom line is he was not there. Now, the odd and strange person who claimed to have been at the Presidio and working with Aquino, Douglas Dietrich, has come out and said that he was 100% innocent there. He wasn't even there. How could he do any of this? And that he actually pointed this out to the military and the police department, that to not prosecute him because he wasn't even there. He was back east. Which is interesting because Dietrich has been attacking Aquino on every single level, demonizing him as much as he can. But he made a statement in 2011 at a conspiracy conference of this information, and claimed that he was responsible for getting Aquino off. Well, I don't believe any of that, but that's another story. But it ties into the fact that here's a detractor who's agreeing with Aquino that he wasn't even there. But that wasn't good enough for everybody in the military. They were told to go after him by Jesse Helms, a politician, and they did. Then they ended up going after him, but, it doesn't mean anything. We're going to stop. We're not going to go through with it. So what happened then, is, of course, is that person that filed those claims for over $3 million sued the Army civilly, and they settled out of court for a couple of $100,000, which is less expensive than going to court. That's the way it's done. It's not a admission that that person was right. It's just, okay, we'll just settle this. And there's makes a good sense. I mean, as much as it's nice to go through and find justice, if it's going to cost you $5 million, well, you're better off throwing $200,000 at this guy to shut him up. And that's how I see it happening, because he wasn't there. Now, here we go again with coming up that now we have by Paul Bonacci stating directly that Michael Aquino, and now this is 3 or 4 people that have stated this, was involved in this abduction. And not only that, that he was picked up by him, and that Michael Aquino brought him to Germany, including Paul Bonacci apparently, and also had a ranch in Colorado, or a house in Colorado, where they had big parties and people were brought, etc. And Paul Bonacci state this was Michael Aquino's place. He went there, brought Johnny Gosch there, and this is where they had their deviant parties with many different children that were sexually raped and abused. Now, he was able to lead the people to the house. Now, he also claimed that underneath that house was a passageway where people were kept in case something happened. And lo and behold, he was able to find this opening, and he opened it up, and there was a big area underneath there, pretty crude. It wasn't really like a basement, but it was, and maybe they didn't want a basement, but it was an area that you pried up a panel, and you could go underneath where people could be stored, and there apparently was carvings, initials carved on there, which they claimed were the kids' initials. And this was a place that they were held in times of problems or just to hold them better. And it was there. There was a passageway underneath there. So he actually found the place in Colorado, near Colorado Springs, the actual house, which was abandoned, and found that area. Now, they didn't go inside. I don't know if they could get inside. They were able to open up this passageway underneath the house, which is pretty suspicious unless that's a common feature in houses in this area, which I don't think it is. As I said, it wasn't an official basement. I don't know if it was deliberately cut out for somewhere, but it seems strange to me that you'd have this kind of basement there with a kind of a secret door going to it. And he was able to identify all that. Now, they found out, and of course, people said this was Michael Aquino's home, and it wasn't Michael Aquino's home, at least not in his name. You have to believe that it'd be pretty stupid to buy that in your own name, so it could be a permanent record of real estate sales. The house was registered to the house was abandoned by the time they went there. The house is registered to a former prison guard. Now, was that a federal prison guard or a state? Because there is some difference here, because federal employees, again, links you to the federal government, the military, etc., CIA. State is a little different, but isn't it kind of odd that a prison guard would own that house anyway? I find that a little odd. I mean, there are a lot of prison guards, but the fact that he would be involved, what are prison guards involved with? Well, they're involved with prisoners, meaning criminals, and they know a lot of them. So the fact that arranging with him to buy a house or using a house or whatever there, he would have been with the people who are perpetrating all this, meaning the criminals that are in that prison. They also stated in that they actually, the guy disappeared. I don't know if they talked with him, this prison guard guy, or not, but they say that he disappeared. Now, is that before or after? Did they talk with him, and then after talking with him, he fled? Well, this is all very strange. Now, one interesting thing is that this is 1986. Now, Aquino stated in 1990, when his full-time contract was canceled, he got a part-time contract to go to, guess where? Colorado. Well, this is kind of interesting. So he went to NORAD, which is a place you can hide and nobody knows about, nobody sees him there. But it could be a way of him establishing his presence in Colorado that looks tied to military, even though this was 4 years prior to that. So was this a preparation that he was getting Colorado ready? Is his statement that he was involved in this new job, this part-time space program in Colorado? Is this another way to connect in there? But now we've got him connected, even though many years apart. I mean, there's a big difference between 1986 and 1990. Now, in 86, as I said, I think he was still teaching in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure. But of all the places, I mean, why is this guy stating that it was in Colorado? Now, he hasn't been able to name anybody else of any involvement. A few people he did. A congressman or senator he named, and I think somebody else, and Michael Aquino, but he doesn't know anybody involved in that program because they don't use their real names. Obviously, that's the problem. He said he knew Aquino because he was a member of the Temple of Set. Now, again, was this before or after? But here again, we get into these very bizarre things, and he's placed yet again in a place by this guy who's come out with a whole bunch of information that has been able to be verified, particularly about scars and things that were on Johnny Gosch's body, that he was able to. The fact that his mother was involved in meditation and yoga. Well, we're getting all these correct things. Are we to believe what he says about Michael Aquino, and why shouldn't we? So here we go again. Yet we have to have a time element here to say, well, where was he in 1986? Can he verify? And now they do have dates and times. Now, not only they know when they went to these places and what times, etc., and what years. Well, where was he then? But I find it odd that, of course, all of a sudden it's Colorado. Well, of course, you've got to remember there's a huge military base there, several of them. There's NORAD. I mean, this is a big Air Force operation in particular. So, and the unfortunate part is, there's almost military bases everywhere. So any place you go, you can say, oh, the military. Yeah, that's right, because they're there. They're all over the country. Unbelievable amount of military bases are all over the country. So it's not necessarily surprising that this place would have a military base. But it's strange that he claims that all this partying was going on in Colorado and all this crime was going on. And this is a place that Aquino has connected himself to directly. He lived in Colorado for 4 years, so he states, from 1990 to 1994. Or was it really much earlier than that? So it's certainly would be obvious, and of course, Colorado Springs, I don't believe it's that far from the NORAD, but the bottom line is that he's now connected himself to that, and he's deliberately stated this. Now, is this something that I'll say, yeah, I've been in Colorado. So that's right, I worked there for 4 years. No, it's not you worked there. You were there in 1986, weren't you? No, I didn't get there in 1990. But there's proof that he's been there that he can reconcile with a particular date. Fishy, fishy, fishy. So here we go again, and we just don't know. We'd have to find out where was he in 1986. When did all this stuff happen in terms of it started in 1986 where they had this house near Colorado Springs, which was a place where they had all these parties and everything else, and where they were abducting people and bringing them to and keeping them there. All of this was part of it. So what does that all mean in terms of where was he at this time? What are the connections and everything else? So, as I said, it just never seems to end. This is a fascinating. But anybody who wants to check out Paul Bonacci's stories is certainly interesting, and they are fairly compelling. On the other hand, this is a noted, declared, and understood schizophrenic with multiple personalities. So, people tend to not give him credit. The police in the Johnny Gosch case never spoke with him. They never talked to this guy at all for whatever reason. I find that to be very strange as well. He was kept in prison when he should have been left out. All of these things are very, very suspicious. And yet again, another person stating Michael Aquino. And we're getting too much of this to just summarily write it off, but none of these people are credible sources, and all of them have been mind-controlled victims. Is this being placed in their mind? Is he really involved in all this stuff, or are everybody blaming him as the scapegoat? I don't know, but it certainly is fishy. The whole thing is very fishy, very suspicious, and he keeps coming up. Now, this is a person that has put out credible information in other areas, so it appears. So why wouldn't this information be credible? Or was this part of his information that's not credible? 90% is good, 10% is bad, and this is it. So we have to be very careful. The unfortunate part is that Michael Aquino is now dead, and the bottom line is that whether he's guilty or not, he has there's no way to respond to this. And secondly, even if we catch him dead to rights, we can't even arrest this guy. That's because of incompetent people that have been constantly putting out wrong information and not seeking the truth of this, finding out who's behind this and clouding up the stories. Even his great detractor has come out and said he was not involved whatsoever in the Presidio problems. Well, that doesn't mean anything. It could have been tied into other areas. Well, yeah, that wasn't, but maybe he was tied into other areas. And people keep claiming him, not necessarily at the Presidio, but all over the place. What's with this? So, again, we have to figure out what's going on there. And, eyewitness accounts, I'm afraid, are just not good enough. We've got to tie people to certain times and dates. Could have they been there? Do they have an alibi? And unfortunately, at this point, it's been so long that a lot of the people, including the perpetrator here, Michael Aquino, is now dead. So not that we necessarily get anything out of him, but it seems to me if somebody sat down with his record, and we know where he was from day to day through his career, particularly at certain times, that we could then line this up with, yeah, he was here, because Kathy O'Brien states he was at events in Washington, D.C. Well, we know what day that was. So was he there? At least, can we get any kind of reaching to it? People are trying to connect him that he was at a particular military base like Ott in Omaha, Nebraska, where he was involved with the Franklin. They also trying to say that he was at Fort Bragg, where the Green Beret officer, medical officer, has been accused of murdering his family. And people have pretty much found out that a group of people somehow got on that base and murdered his family. Very suspicious yet again. People are trying to say, well, he was there. Well, can't we trace that? But, this takes a huge amount of time and effort, and I'm not sure how we can trace all this. And it's getting to the point where it's not even very important anymore or even interesting. But is it a fascinating story to track this? Because there's all sorts of problems here. And the bigger problem is that nobody is looking into this, that there is no law enforcement that gives a damn, and nobody is trying to follow through with any of that, even though these are some of the most heinous and serious crimes you could possibly think of, happening to many, many families. But there's a total disinterest in most law enforcement. While because of this case, certain things have gone into it, and Noreen Gosh has gotten through certain legal bills and cases where now missing children are treated better. So this is all very positive, but the actual facts of everything still don't add up. But this is fairly damning information with Aquino to be labeled yet again, to be 100% identified, yet he can't identify hardly anybody else except for a senator. Again, it's very good, and there's always that little bit at the end that we can't really figure out. And to this point, well, we can't even, if we even do find the truth, this guy is gone. But it would be interesting to find out what he was involved in. What did he do? And of course, this is what happens when you have so much secrecy in the military for no reason whatsoever. There's no reason to keep anything secret about this guy's record. Now, I don't know how much of it you can get or not, but the bottom line is that this is very, very true. So, to find out all these details, and people are just headhunting here. They want to get this guy at all costs, no matter what's going on, based on just their feelings. And anytime any contradictory or questioning information comes up, they reject it. And of course, they have no intentions of talking to you if you're going to bring up questions. Do you have something to say to verify my opinion, or basically bugger off? So the whole idea is that's where they're coming from, and it just doesn't hold water. And all this time where Douglas Dietrich has been attacking Michael Aquino, particularly at the Presidio, he has made a total statement that he had nothing to do with the molestations at the Presidio and wasn't even in that part of the world. So I'm assuming he would say, yeah, that's right, but and he did add that the children identified him anyway. Now, I don't know what that means. He's kind of leaving the door open. But the whole idea is that he stated that he got him off because he wasn't there. Now, I'm assuming he would say, well, yeah, but he was involved in other things. Well, again, that doesn't hold much water. If we're talking about the Presidio, which this particular person claims he was at, he has completely and totally cleared Michael Aquino of wrongdoing at the Presidio. Now, that doesn't take care of everything else. We just don't know. But here we go again. I mean, this is kind of a fantastic, phantasmagorical tale. Would make one hell of a movie. But right now, we don't have an ending. And so many eyewitness accounts that start to build up here are quite shocking, yet nobody has done anything about this. Nobody has questioned him about it. They haven't put it together. They haven't put charges against him. What's going on? Why is that? Because none of these witnesses are credible because of their psychic trauma. None of them. Here's the guy that is a proven, diagnosed, 100% schizophrenic with 5 or 6 personalities. The same thing with Kathy O'Brien. Does she know anything? Everything pops into her head that she's been programmed with, and that goes with everybody else. So we're at a pretty strange point here, and hopefully we'll find out as the pieces come together. As this has popped up, maybe we can kind of confirm these other things, but it's kind of very suspicious that he would be linked to Colorado when he was going to Colorado after he was released from his first contract, where he apparently was in Washington at the time. Now all of a sudden he's in Colorado, and now we have reports of things going on in Colorado. Now, people have been hanged and put in the electric chair for less. So, more thought to chew upon. Until next time.